Ray, what about I let you do your own introduction? But Ray was our overseas award scholarship award winner of I don't remember the year, but so after he got the award, he went into Swire's management training program. He's now working with Cathay Pacific on the sales and customer perspective. He's now stationing in Singapore because he overlooks the Southeast Asia region. So welcome, Ray, and welcome everybody joining us in the afternoon. Ray, what about I pass you the time and it's introduce yourself and tell us what is the aviation experiencing now. I work with the airport authority, so I see that how few people we have and how quiet the terminal is. What is the perspective from the airline?
Yeah, for sure. I think today the whole topic is around this, and thank you, Senia, for doing the introduction. So let me know if the slides don't go as planned, or if some annotations are still floating around.
I think you're on the, yeah.
Okay.
Annotation, we need the host to clear it off.
Okay, yep, so might need some help. But yeah, while we're doing that, I just want to say it's a great pleasure to speak with you and share with you a little bit about what we see from the aviation industry and how the pandemic has been transforming it in the past year and a half. And I think today we have quite a small group, so I think it's great if there's any questions. I think this would be a very intimate kind of group that you can, please feel free to raise those inquiries that you have, and I'll try my best to answer them. So as a quick self-intro, I think for me, I've always had an interest in aviation ever since going to the airports, seeing the hustle and bustle, this energy there. I really find a lot of excitement in helping people to travel to get where they want to be. And because of that, I was interested in operations management, topics like business, like marketing. And I do want to say a big thank you to the Sir Edward Youd Memorial Fund for helping me to go overseas and study, especially these different topics. And I think that really got my career kickstarted. So after that, I joined the Swire Group as a management trainee. I was very luckily being seconded to Cathay Pacific, the aviation branch of the company. And I think from what I've learned, I think I've been able to apply more and more of that as I went up the ladder. So I've had work experiences in Hong Kong, in China, in the Philippines, and now in Singapore. I've worked in both the passenger side as well as the cargo side of the business. So right now, being based in Singapore, I do look after the whole of Southeast Asia. Right now we have 7 countries, and I'm very lucky to be able to work with a big team of around 100 people who are salespeople, marketers, people working in public relations, digital sales, so on and so forth. So a very talented bunch of people. I think when I first started, one of my aspirations was really to work with people from all around the world, experience different cultures, see new things on the ground. And I think it was because of Sir Edward Youd Memorial Fund, I was able to get one step closer to all of my aspirations and be able to work in such a dynamic environment. So again, big thank you. And I think this is a small way in giving back to the community of our Scholars Association by sharing what I've learned over this time.
Ray, before you go for it, do you mind doing a full screen of your PowerPoint?
Oh, is this?
We're in the presentation mode, presenter mode.
All right. Yep. So that was supposed to be a secret, but then
yeah.
Let me see. How do I do that?
Yeah, we are now seeing it full screen.
All right, but if I show you the full screen, I won't see my notes. But I think that's okay. If I need to refer back to it, I'll just switch. So yeah. I guess the share. Oh, yeah. Anything? All right. I think that's good. So just to frame the sharing today, I think we are talking about the whole of aviation industry, but you find that a lot of these viewpoints are presented from my own experience while working in Cathay Pacific. So I'll try my best to look from the lens of Cathay and look out to the whole of the aviation industry. And just to make it super clear, my opinions do not necessarily represent those of my company. So let's just take that as my personal opinions. Okay, so for the agenda today, there are 3 big topics that I'd like to share with you. The first one are the challenges that are brought by this pandemic to the aviation industry. The second one is how we've been adapting and transforming ourselves based on this. And the third one is what we think would be the outlook of the travel market. Well, talking about the challenges first, I think this picture must be quite stress-inducing, seeing so many people in such a small space. So this is the US. First, when the kind of travel requirements kind of kicked in, the immigrations weren't really prepared to handle all the additional document checking for the travelers. And as you can see here, because of the wait, many people started to pile at the arrivals hall, not being able to get through immigrations. And I think this just shows a small snippet of the different obstacles that came out as a result of the pandemic. So here, we're not that unfamiliar with crowds coming to our offices, but when the flight restrictions first hit us, indeed, I think there was a lot of confusion and also a lot of cancellations. I can still remember back then, the first country in Southeast Asia that instituted some sort of flight restriction was in fact the Philippines. So they decided to restrict the number of flights going into Manila and Cebu so as to control the influx of cases. And also they posted some travel restrictions. So unless you were a citizen of the Philippines or some diplomat, you were not able to get into the country. So back then, when I first got this news, I was actually in Jakarta. I was attending a sales travel event. We had different booths selling tickets to all over the world. And I still remember back then, my phone just started ringing crazy. I started getting a lot of different messages talking about this issue. And I actually had to step out of the exhibition hall, find a sofa to sit down, read the messages. And then and there, we had to decide what kind of waivers we had to give to the travelers whose flights were being canceled. So if you can imagine right now, refunds, rebookings being free, this is quite the norm nowadays to give travelers more assurance. But back then, when it first started in the start of 2020, you can imagine it was quite something that we had to really persuade our headquarters to grant our travelers because simply these cancellations are not their faults. So we were trying to bargain so that they can refund their tickets without an additional fee. So following these cancellations, as you can see here, the photo on the left is our office in Saigon. The photo on the right is our office in Manila. Lots of people were coming over. They were confused about why their flights are being canceled, and they were trying to seek a refund while we were still working through the new waivers that we can give them. So of course, different governments started to also establish different travel and quarantine requirements. A lot of these were very different from country to country because each government was making their own decisions essentially. And as you can imagine, as an airline, which has to operate within all these legal bounds, we had to be very careful. We could not let a traveler who did not comply with those new requirements travel to that country and risk having them being turned back at immigrations so far away from their homes. So that was something that caused us major trouble. Basically, we had this Bible for our airport teams. Our check-in staff have to refer to that Bible to see, okay, so if you were to travel, say, from Hong Kong into New York, what would be the travel requirements? And since we fly to over 100 destinations, you can imagine that the combination of these different countries could be like 100 squared, so 10,000 different combinations of travelers and requirements that our teams had to understand and digest. And I think the worst thing on top of that was that these requirements were changing almost every day. So this Bible was also changing every day. I think the collective thought from our whole airport team was that this Bible has never been updated as frequently as it had in the past 1.5 years. And definitely this put a lot of stress on our frontline teams to comply with these requirements. And apart from that, one other one for the frontline team that caused a lot of chaos was being able to be safe. We were in places where there were a lot of people passing through at the airports. So in order to be safe, we had to get PPE, personal protective equipment. And if you can imagine all of that rush for face masks at the beginning, this was really one of the obstacles and really limiters for our people to get to work safely and be assured that they can carry out their duties as usual. One other limitation that came into light, especially in the beginning of this year, was the limitation on crewing. So whether or not there were passengers traveling, that's one thing. Whether we have the aircraft and whether they can fly is the second thing. And whether we have crew to actually operate these flights was a third thing. So the government told us that, okay, for any crew who are going on Cathay Pacific flights and indeed all flights out of Hong Kong, when they return, they had to go through a 14-day quarantine together with a 7-day observation period. So if all of our crew have to comply with this requirement, this meant that effectively our manpower would be down by, well, yeah, we only had 1/21 of our manpower left when it came to our cockpit crew and cabin crew. And what we had to do immediately, firstly, was cut down our flights. We had a very steep cut at the beginning of February, and also we had to ask for volunteers from our crew. So they had to operate flights for, I think, 3 to 5 weeks continuously and not leave the restricted area of the Hong Kong airport so that we can still maintain a very skeleton operation of flights. So I hope this gives you an idea of just how many different issues we have to contend with when it comes to actually making sure that our operation is still running in a meaningful way. And I think apart from the supply side, the demand side was also in, well, very, very big trouble. Initially, when COVID first broke out and different countries started locking down their borders, there was a huge wave of repatriation. Basically, people were trying to rush back to go home in order to avoid being stuck in a certain country. And after that first wave, the traffic essentially just took a deep dive, almost like falling off a cliff. And the traffic remaining is essential travel. So some of these might be people still going back home. It might be people who are going abroad to work, and also students who are going abroad to study. But other than that, a lot of our different traffic streams have essentially died at this moment. So this put immense financial pressure on us. And usually our aircraft, if it's a narrow body, it can carry around 200 passengers. If it's a wide body aircraft, it can take around 300 or 400 passengers. But now for our flights, I'll show you the numbers in just a second. So the number of destinations for us throughout our whole network for Cathay Pacific dropped by almost 80% compared to what we had in 2019. That was before the pandemic. The flights per day, you can see we're operating at almost 1/10 of how many flights we had before in terms of frequencies. And this is a staggering number. In terms of passengers, we only have around 1% of what we used to have before. And this is not even filling up our flights because our load factors have dropped to only 24% on average. So this means, yeah, there's only around 20, maybe or 40 passengers on our flights for the smaller aircraft. In terms of cargo, thankfully, this is still one of the things that haven't fallen as much as the passenger side. And the reason why there's still a huge drop, despite the big demand to transport a lot of medicine, vaccines, and PPE, is because we've cut down our schedule in such a steep way that we've reduced capacity for cargo to be able to fly. So this is very unfortunate and indeed something that's causing us a huge cash burn.
Yeah, I would like to supplement here, maybe explain a bit on how our cargo operation is like. So imagine if you get on a plane to, for example, Japan. So all you would know maybe is you sitting on the aircraft and you know that your luggage is also with you. But what you may not notice is actually the aircraft also carry a great amount of cargo. That is why when we have a great reduction on passenger flight, the total cargo capacity of Cathay or other airlines also drops significantly. So say if you go to Japan, you may be having Japanese strawberry with you at the same flight. And that is one of the challenges in the aviation and logistics industry, that is not just about the people reduction, it's also about the cargo reduction as well.
Yeah, thank you, Senia. I think sometimes it's very interesting if anybody gets a chance just to peer underneath the passenger kind of a level. There's this whole cargo belly for all of our aircraft. And there's also freighter aircraft where it only takes in cargo. It's very fascinating downstairs. And indeed, this is really costing us a lot, not having that capacity to keep on carrying cargo around the world. And thanks to Senia, this is a picture that she shared with me as bird-eyes view of the Hong Kong International Airport. And just a very sad picture as well. You can see a lot of aircraft being parked, not being able to operate. And apart from being parked in Hong Kong, which is a very humid place, actually a lot of our aircraft is being parked in places such as Australia, as well as Spain. So here, especially for this picture, it's a place called Alice Springs in Australia. So thankfully, the climate there is relatively dry. So for aircraft, which is a lot of metal, you can imagine that this is the optimal place to store them if we can't use them for a while. The third challenge that I feel very strongly in this environment is not being able to see my teams and also my clients in a face-to-face manner. On the top of there is a visit that I made to Myanmar just around a year or so ago. And sadly, none of that is happening, of course, at the moment. And we're switching to Teams, to Zoom meetings, one of which we're on right now. So when it first struck, when the pandemic first struck, I think our teams were very smart. They proactively split themselves to reduce the risk of cross-infecting each other. But then most governments really put some weight on these work from home measures. There were circuit breakers being put in. So most of us had to immediately switch to work from home overnight. And I still remember back then, there was this huge issue about not having enough laptops, especially for people who used to be taking customer calls in the offices with a phone, with their desktop. Immediately, we had to scour for IT resources. And also we had to digitize a lot of files because we used to rely on paper, a lot of records being on paper. And we had to make sure that we had the necessary digital infrastructure to facilitate working from home. And I think this has been on and off. And for Singapore right now, I am working from home. And not being able to see the clients and the team meant that we had to find a lot of different channels to still engage them. So I think one thing that really struck me was how we had to bump up the frequency of team communications. I still remember I used to do these commercial town halls, maybe half a year in the past, and then I would go to each country to visit them, talk to them, share some of our kind of directions commercially. And now what we do is a bi-monthly commercial town hall so that we can make sure that everyone is up to date with the latest situation. And of course, for clients, I guess they're not too enthusiastic to see us face-to-face as well. So there's been quite a lot of virtual engagement, such as doing trade briefings to our travel agents online, something that a lot of our teams feel that is new to them, and all of us are learning how to do it better. So that's the first part of my sharing. And moving on to transformation, as you can see here, this is one of our 777s being transformed into, well, the seats being ripped out so that we can put the cargo and tie them down on the passenger deck. But before I go into that part, I do want to share with you the kind of fundamental different view when it comes to health and safety. So if you recall back in the very unfortunate 9/11 incident in the US, that changed aviation fundamentally. After that, for all of our different airports and of course security, all of that had to be stepped up to prevent any of such incidents from happening again and try to safeguard our passengers and the airline safety. And in the same way, I think the pandemic is really putting health and safety in the forefront, something that really needs to be addressed in the coming future. And I think the first one that comes to mind is our disinfection procedures. So for aircraft, apart from each turnaround, when the flights arrive, there's usually a very quick clean, and then there will be deeper cleans when it hits different checkpoints. So around, like say 30 days, 60 days, 180 days, and so on. But right now, when the flights arrive at each port, they have to go through a very thorough disinfection process. And all the surfaces are being wiped clean. We have to do kind of like these antimicrobacterial coatings to make sure that everything is well, germ-free. And you can imagine that's costing us a very different kind of time in preparing for all of these procedures and making sure the cabins are safe before the next batch of customers come onto our flight. And of course, if there are any positive cases that get caught on any of these aircraft, then these will be sent straight to the maintenance hangar, go through a thorough deep clean, and come back out before they can service passengers again. So yeah, very thorough, kind of different way of addressing cleaning. I think that's one thing. And I think when it comes to customer experience, there's also a very kind of different approach. So for example, on our website, we have a very comprehensive COVID-19 info center, and a lot of other airlines do the same so that they can provide customers with the essential information that can help them decide on what they need to do before they travel to another destination. When passengers get on board, in the past, for example, for the premium cabins, there would be a bar service. But right now, of course, because of how we want to reduce the contact between people, such services have been simplified. A lot of the meals have also been switched to the pre-packaged, made-to-serve kind of meals instead of the usual kind of maybe different courses, different selections for our customers. And all of this had to be rethought in a very, very quick time frame so that we can help customers feel safe when they travel with us. And when it comes to contactless solutions, I think one big part that we depend on, to with Senia, of course, on the Hong Kong side, is developing the contactless solutions. So let me showcase one of the things that has been kind of in the works between Hong Kong Airport as well as Cathay Pacific. All right, so that was a small clip of the kind of biometric technology that we're rolling out to enable a contactless travel experience whenever you go to the airport. So I presume that most of us haven't been back to the airport for a while, maybe with the exception of Senia. And I think next time when you get there, there will be some new surprises for you. In terms of transformation, another one is our source of business. So of course, we cannot rely on the same travel peaks during the holidays, and we had to make sure that we're focused on where the business still is. For passengers, as we mentioned, these are the essential travel segments that remain, things that we do focus on and make sure that we reach out to the right channels to tap on. And I think for the other different kind of travel streams that we used to have, such as for corporate travel, these are gone for a while. I think companies have a very strong concern for their people to travel during these times. They don't want their people to get stuck in other countries or risk getting infected while they're traveling to other high-risk areas. So unfortunately, these are the remaining streams that we can tap. And of course, cargo transportation is another one that we just mentioned, and we'll be also showing a short clip to you in just a moment in how we transform our aircraft and get them ready for lifting cargo. Right now for Cathay Pacific, I believe we have around 6 aircraft, 6 777s that have been converted so that we can carry cargo instead of just passengers. Another one, which people might be interested in, is how we can still enable our customers to benefit from all of these different kind of things that we've perhaps, well, it's not really given, it's more like what they've earned in terms of Asia miles in the past. I think not being able to redeem air tickets is a huge problem right now. And if we just look at last year, redemption for air tickets dropped by over 80% because of what's happening. But at the same time, actually, the redemption for non-air products jumped by 85%. So there's almost like a proportional jump in a switch between these different services. So our teams have been expediting the developments of different on-ground offerings. So for example, what you're able to redeem on Asia Miles, the different suite of products. It can be electronics, can be home appliances. And I think the exciting thing is something that they developed called Miles Plus Cash. So you can switch between spending miles or spending cash, or a combination of them, in order to get these different products. And I think the team has also been working very hard on, for example, getting restaurant partners so you can earn and spend miles with these partners while you're still in Hong Kong. So talking about how we transform passenger aircraft into cargo services, here is another short clip that I think would do a better job than me talking about it. Yeah, pretty cool. I used to work in cargo, and I can tell you just making sure that all of that cargo is secure in the aircraft is no small feat in itself. So quite interesting things are developing, and you can see how we all in the aviation industry have to be agile in adapting to the situation. So the third transformation I see is in the way of how we do business. When we first started off in the pandemic, I think back in April and May of last year, we used to do a lot of forecasting. We would try to model the demand of the coming months based on what we know historically, and we would try to guess when the different countries would resume in terms of the different traffic streams and calculate the new budgets for our different countries. And of course, right now, looking back at it, we could have just thrown that out of the window. The pandemic was just so unpredictable. And I think nobody would have predicted that it would be so long lasting in terms of the impact on the world. So instead of trying to do a lot of analysis and spending time on, well, inaccurate forecasting, what we're doing right now is really trying to keep our ears very close to the ground, observe the trends, check out what the governments are planning, and be agile in responding to pockets of demand that occur. I think one of these examples is the air travel bubble between Hong Kong and Singapore. So every time when the government announces it, then immediately we kickstart into action, we prepare for it. And while it's a very bumpy road, I think this is still a show of how agile the aviation has to be in order to capture any potential business at all in this environment. In terms of customer engagement, in the past, a lot of our engagement was face-to-face or getting phone calls from our customers. But now, since all of us sit at home, we really want to get servicing through our fingertips digitally, for example, on our phones. So some of the new things that we've been doing, for example, is developing our digital channels so that you can reach us more easily in whatever way you want. So one of these examples is WhatsApp. Right now, if you go to the contacts page, we do have our WhatsApp number prominently displayed so that you may get any servicing that you require through WhatsApp and not necessarily through a phone call. And the last one that I feel is very important is flexibility. We did customer surveys in the past months trying to understand what drives customer ticket purchases currently in the pandemic. And one of the key factors that really jumped out was flexible travel policies. People want to know that even if they buy tickets right now, they can rebook their tickets if they feel that it's not suitable to travel. And they can also be able to, for example, refund if the cancellation is not something of their fault. So for Cathay, we've rolled out Fly Worry Free. And for other airlines, they've rolled out very similar schemes where you can, for example, refund your tickets and turn it into credits. You can rebook your tickets for an unlimited amount of times. And this is something that I think will still be in place, hopefully, while the pandemic is still ongoing. In terms of assurance, while all of us would be worried about traveling and getting infected while going to a different place. What we've offered is a free COVID insurance policy. If you go and travel, all Cathay passengers will be insured to up to, I think it's 200,000 US dollars in terms of medical expenses overseas. So just in case anything happens, then we still have that comfort of mind in knowing that we'll be taken care of. So I think these are things that we've never thought about before, but new things that have really been transformed in our business. Okay, so this brings me to the third part of my sharing, which is about the outlook. And of course, nobody has a crystal ball. I think when we look at the IATA data, this is the International Association, I think what, Transportation, Aviation, can't remember the exact name, I'm sorry about that, but it is the biggest civil aviation authority, not authority, but governing body globally. And what they're saying is that in order to return back to pre-pandemic levels of traffic, it will take another 3 years until we get there. And that's more or less an optimistic scenario. So you can imagine that this will still be a very bumpy road. And if we look at vaccinations across the world, you can see here, this is vaccine doses administered per 100 people. If you get to a more deeper blue color, then you have essentially 1 dose, and you need 2 doses to be completely immunized. So for most of the world, we're still in this race. There's still a long way to go, but just as how Europe is reopening its borders to vaccinated passengers, I think that there will be more air travel corridors, air travel bubbles being established between these different countries that have strong confidence in each other, that they know other countries' citizens have been vaccinated, they have low cases, and therefore they can permit travel to happen again so that they can capture the economic benefits. And this is not something that's easy, as we just talked about. Even for the Hong Kong-Singapore travel bubble, it's been delayed for the 2nd time now, to my disappointment. And I was really hoping to come back to Hong Kong in June. But sadly, I think I'll have to wait a little longer until the case numbers in Singapore drop down again before I can come back to Hong Kong without quarantine. And similarly, for New Zealand and Australia, unfortunately, because of some cases that happened, they have also paused the travel bubble. So it is a very fragile, still a very vulnerable kind of corridor, but hopefully with more vaccination across different parts of the globe, we would be able to have stronger air connections within these different places and help you go to where you want in the soon future. And something that would help us to really give the other side, the other countries, confidence that the passenger is vaccinated or they've done all of the required pre-departure tests would be digital health passes. So a lot of different countries and organizations such as IATA and Common Pass, which is shown here, are developing their solutions. And I think there will be a phase where they're still testing different solutions, they'll trial it in different countries, and it will take quite a lot of international discussion and alignment before we have a golden standard that will be unified across different countries and trusted across the globe. This is really, a lot of it is up to the governments and something that we will have to push in the future so that we can have a very easy and accessible way of proving our test results. So on the topic of vaccinations, there is this little clip I'd like to show you, and I think this will be the last clip that I'll show you before we get to the Q&A. And I think it addresses how complex the logistics are when transporting vaccines. Give me a second. Yeah, so that's all that I've prepared for my sharing. And I hope you've learned something new through all of this. Thank you so much for listening. And I'll pass the time over to Senia and see if we've got any questions that we'd like to get answered.
Great, thanks, Ray. So if our audience have